Boatworks Today is sponsored by Total Boat and Alexial Yacht Coatings, as well as supported by the generosity from the beautiful folks over on Patreon. Thank you so much. So, welcome back to the shop, everybody. Hope you're having a fantastic weekend. My name is Andy with Boatworks Today. In this video, we're going to be covering 3 different techniques that you can use for when you have to lay glass in an upside down or, in this case, an inverted, kind of a situation. These are methods that I have used for many, many years. They are time proven and they just work. So with that said, let's dive in. All right, so it's taken a little bit to get to this point, but I think we're finally ready. Now, when we're talking about laying glass, either upside down or in this case, in an inverted position, there's one thing that I kind of want to make sure that I emphasize and drive home, and that is when you're cutting your fabric, make sure that you're cutting it to a manageable size. Now, what that means, that's going to vary from person to person, experience, the actual location, how awkward is it, is the area that you're working in. There are some variables that kind of come into play here, but keep it cut to a manageable size. Now, for this, I cut all of my pieces to roughly 2 foot by 4 feet long. It's slightly less than 4 feet, so roughly 8 square feet of material. And for one person, that's a good size. I don't know that I'd want to go too much larger than that when you're working solo. Now, there are some variables that can come into play that will allow you to work with larger pieces. The obvious one being if you have more sets of hands, right? The more hands that you have, the larger the pieces that you can be working with. And there are some other different techniques I'm going to be covering here later in this video that will allow you to working by yourself, allow you to work with larger pieces. Now, just like with a lot of other things, there are some trade-offs. And depending on the application or what it is that you're doing, sometimes those trade-offs can be worth it, and sometimes they probably not the best option. But again, that all depends on what it is specifically that you're trying to do. So the material I'm working with here today is 1708, and it's not exactly a light material. I didn't want to make this too easy on myself, but it's probably the fabric that we're going to be using the most often. So I wanted to kind of keep this demo as realistic as I could. Now, if I remember right, 1708 uses, when you're wetting it out with polyester resin, it averages around 2 ounces of resin per square foot of material, specifically 1708. Now, with these sections that I cut out here, we're talking 8 square feet. So I'm going to mix up a little over 16 ounces just to make sure that I don't run short. And I'm going to be catalyzing this at about 1.5%, just so that I have a little bit of extra working time. So 16 ounces. I should have put my glasses on. Actually, I'm going to go a little bit more. Oop. Did I actually do 16 ounces? I think so, yeah. Okay, so for 16 ounces then, give or take, I'm going to add in about 8 cc's of mech. And let me grab my glasses. So just a quick pause in the video here. Future me just realized that I forgot to record a section when I wetted out that middle area of this panel. Didn't do anything special. All I did was roll out a nice even coat of the catalyzed resin, and well, we'll come back to that here in a little bit. Okay, and this area is going to start out identical to this one. We're going to wet the surface, and then we're going to turn our attention over towards the glass. Okay, so that looks good. Now, before I actually take and apply the material on here, I'm going to do one little step here. And that is that I'm going to lightly coat the back side of the 1708. So the chopped strand side, I'm going to give this just a light coating. I do not want to saturate it at this point. I want to get just a little bit of resin on the back side so that when I put this up in place, it'll help to hold it, help to make it stick. If I were to actually saturate this thing, it's going to be almost impossible to pick this up and handle it without it stretching and deforming and just basically turning into a hot mess on us. Couple little tips. Make sure that you always keep your roller and your tray within arm's reach, because once you stick this up into place, you're not going to be able to let go of it, at least initially. Now this is going to look a little sloppy at first, and that's all right. That's how it goes. The name of the game here is move quick and hit any area that looks like it's getting ready to kind of let go. Now, once you get it wet out, this material should not flop down on top of you. But right now, this is kind of like that danger zone where anything can happen. Because it's not saturated, it's just a little wet. And that's about it. So I'm holding this area while I'm working out the rest of this. And one other little tip, you can see I've got my edge down here. I'm only going to be making my rolls going down. I'm not going to roll coming up because I might snag that edge and pull it. And again, same thing applies to the sides. I'm going to work off of the edge. I'm not going to roll back onto the edge. Now, if you were going to be doing multiple layers of glass, you know, obviously you're going to be doing one layer at a time. What I would probably do is get one layer down, let it sit for 20-30 minutes, or at least until the resin starts to gel. Because the more material you get on here when it's wet on wet, the heavier that's going to be. And you know, in something like this, gravity is not your friend. So I would personally do one layer at a time, 15-20 minutes apart. You know, once the resin from that initial layer starts to gel, it's not going to go anywhere. But if you try and do too much too fast, that can come back and bite you. Now, on this center section, this is what we wet out, you know, right off the bat. What I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to let this resin start to get tacky. So I'll, you know, after I wet it out, I'm going to let it sit for 20-ish minutes, give or take. I'll come back in, and you know, when I can kind of touch it with my knuckle and it's still a little bit wet, but it's kind of more sticky, then that's when I'm going to take the dry piece of 1708 and just roll it out. What that's somewhat going to act like is, I don't know, I guess kind of like Velcro. That's probably not the best analogy, but I think you kind of get the idea. You know, so that hopefully with a little bit of luck, the tackiness of this resin will hold that glass in place, and then we can come back in and wet it out and hopefully not have to worry about anything, you know, flopping down on top of us. Now, the advantage of doing it this way is that you can work with larger pieces of glass. You know, so for example, if I had wet out like a 4x4 foot area, and that's how large the glass actually was, after this resin is tacked up, in theory, we should be able to come in and just lay out that whole 4x4 foot piece, and it'll stay put. Now, if we tried to do that, you know, the way that we did this first section, with one set of hands, you know, being, you know, when you're working solo, there's no way that that's going to work out. It's going to be just, it's going to go sideways on you every single time. But doing it this way, the advantage again is that you can work with larger areas, or larger pieces of fiberglass. So it's been about a half an hour, and again, this is going to vary depending on what kind of temperatures that you're in. My shop is 65 degrees, so after about a half an hour, it's gotten to the point where it's tacky enough where it's ready to go. Now, obviously, if you're working in an area that was 80 degrees or, you know, or warmer, it's going to take a lot less time to get to this point. But let me show you kind of the way that I check to make sure that it's tacked up enough. So basically, I just take a little chunk of paper towel and I'll press it on there. And then if I can rip this off and some paper towel gets stuck to here, then it's tacky enough. And that is what we're looking for. I've already gone ahead and poured out the resin that I'm going to need for here. I have not catalyzed it yet, but it's right here. It's ready to go. So for right now, we're going to keep our fingers crossed that we hit our window correctly here. And you do want to make sure that when you're kind of rolling this out like this, that you're actually getting it laid down flat and you're not getting a wrinkle in the glass as you're putting it out. Because if you get a wrinkle in here now, you're probably not going to be able to work it out. There, that looks good. So now at this point, you know, short of a good heavy breeze coming in and grabbing this should be good. This should not go anywhere. Now it may let loose a little bit as we start wetting this out, and that's just something we're going to have to keep an eye out for. You know, and again, you know, any area that looks like it's starting to kind of lift off, we're going to come back with the roller and make sure that that does not happen. So, all right, let me get my resin catalyzed and start wetting this out. Make sure that you are holding the roller either off to the side or in front of you. You just want to make sure that you're never directly over top of it. Because drips are not a question of if, but when. And at this point, when I'm rolling the resin out, I'm not gonna, at least at this point, you know, I'm not going to make sure that it is completely getting saturated. I want to get resin over the whole thing. Let the resin start to absorb into the glass. I can always come back and add some more, but I'm not looking to get the whole thing completely saturated at this point. You know, because the resin that's behind here, it's still curing, and I want to make sure that I get a chemical bond, you know, so between the resins while it's still a little on the wet side. Because we didn't really have any wet resin on the back side of this, it's going to take a little bit more effort to make sure that we apply it enough on this face and actually work it in through all the fibers here. So this isn't going anywhere. Let me mix up another small batch. I'll be right back. And that is looking good to me. Now, I'm sure this is going to come up as a question. Why does that one look a different color than that one? Well, because that resin has already gelled. This one has not. Now, this last demo is going to be somewhat of a spin from what we just did, except rather than using resin, we're going to actually use a spray adhesive, and specifically this one right here. Now, I'm sure someone's going to make this comment that, you know, this adhesive is going to somehow make the bond of the fiberglass to the surface less than ideal or not as good as it should be, and that's not true. This is regularly done, and what happens is that the styrene that's in the polyester resin, now let me back that up. I don't know that this would work as well if you were going to be using epoxy. But I know when you're using polyester or vinyl ester resin, the styrene in the resin breaks down this adhesive, and it essentially becomes part of the layup, and it doesn't affect it in a negative way whatsoever. So what I'm going to be doing here is that I'm just going to apply a nice, you know, even light coat, let it tack up for a few minutes, and then just like on this centerpiece, we're going to roll the glass out and then wet it out. So while we're waiting here, the way that I've used this kind of approach in the past is if you go back, well, maybe I'll put a pop-up card, you know, maybe like right here. But years and years ago, I did a restoration job on an old, like a 57 Glass Magic. It kind of looked like the Batmobile. But anyways, the short story is that the boat was left in a ditch for like 20, 30 years. And the person that bought it wanted it to be restored to match his 57 Chevy. Paint, color scheme, everything. And it worked because that boat back in the day was the kind where they had the big fins, just like a lot of the cars did at that time. So the way that I use this on that particular project is, you know, because the boat was going to be, it was a show boat. It wasn't ever going to be seeing water at all. And I had a very tight timeline on it. So what I did is, just for example, say like one night before I was getting ready to check out for the evening, I came in, sprayed the boat, and I hung the glass dry, and I left. I came back the following day, the glass was already hung, so at that point I had a full day of just wetting it out. One of the advantages of this kind of approach is that the size area that you're going to be glassing is somewhat unlimited, to be quite honest. I mean, that particular boat was like 14 or 15 feet long, and I did both sides, basically one solid piece, I think, all the way around. And it worked out great. It has been about 5 minutes, and see how it works. Actually, I know it's going to work. I've done this many, many times. But again, it's the same kind of gotchas to watch out for as we did on the centerpieces. You want to make sure that you're laying the glass out flat and you're not laying it so that there's going to be a wrinkle already in the fabric. Because if there is, like I said before, you're probably not going to be able to work it out. And just like that, we are all set. We'll mix up some resin and get her wet out. And just like before, all I'm looking to do at this stage is just get as even of a layer of resin as possible over the surface, and then I'll come back afterwards and finish working it in. And my roller's starting to get sticky, which means I need to do either one of two things. Either call this good or swap out for a new roller. And since I'm at this point, and this is just a demonstration, I'm gonna save the roller. But what's happening is that because the roller is starting to get a little tacky, it's wanting to grab the glass and kind of lift it up a little bit. If this were on an actual job, I'd have no problem swapping out the roller. But for a demo like this, I think you get the point. Now, with these three different, approaches kind of demonstrated here, I want to talk a little bit, I'm not going to go overboard on this, but I want to talk a little bit about where or what type of application each of these might be best suited. So, for example, the first one that we did, this is what's considered the traditional, tried and true way of laying up glass. If I were dealing with an area that was structural, below the water line or anything like that, this is the approach that I would definitely take, which was the first option that we covered here. Now, these other two, you've heard me talk about doing like cosmetic coverings over the years of the different projects, and what I'm referring to when I say that is that. Let's just say we're, say up on deck, we're getting ready to, get the surface prepped for painting. And there's just a ton of crazing, dry gel coat, just tiny little cracks, spider cracks just running everywhere. And what I've done in the past is I've gone through and I've laid, some glass over top of all of that just to stabilize that surface and give us a brand new, finishing surface for when we apply the paint. These two applications would be best suited for something like that. With this one kind of cutting maybe the middle ground between, you could use this for a structural type repair, but I don't know that I would use this for a structural type repair. This is more of a cosmetic type covering. But for that type of application, it's perfectly acceptable. Would I use this spray adhesive approach for something that was structural below the water line? No. I would either get some more hands in a case of beer to bribe some buddies to give me a hand for an afternoon and tackle it that way. But this type of approach, this should really be limited to doing cosmetic type coverings. Middle one, cosmetic, you could do structural types with it, I guess, but 100% approved for structural repair, which was our first demonstration. And with that said, I'm going to wrap up this video. So as always, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you found this helpful. And if you did, hit that thumbs up button. If you're not already subscribed, hit the subscribe button and that little notification bell box thing down below. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, comments, feel free to leave those down below. I will do my best to follow up with you. And as always, I want to thank you for your time. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend, and I will see you in the next video.
This has been a Boatworks Today production.